Kay is with Alf Collins from CBV Brahmans at Marlborough. This interview is brought to you by the Australian Brahman Breeders Association in recognition of the 75th year since the formation of the association on the 7th of October 1946. The association and the breed continue to thrive and grow, and many of those stories, past and present, should be recorded for future generations to enjoy.
This afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, I'm interviewing Alf Collins, and anyone who's had anything to do with the beef industry, beef marketing, beef genetics, or indeed the Brahman industry will have come across Alf, and his name will be no stranger. He has probably spent more hours and time than anyone else in the industry studying genetics and what makes animals work and how they work than the average person. So Alf, it's great to have you. Thanks for coming in, and we look forward to hearing all about your exploits into this, what is not regarded by a lot of people as the standard procedures for doing things. And I know that you like to be a leader in doing things differently, and that's been your way always. So going on from that, let's go right back. Like I said, the Collins name is certainly not new to the beef industry or indeed the Brahman breed. But your slant and your way of doing things and breeding cattle is probably a little bit different to the way you grew up doing it. So when did you decide that you needed to get smarter and work smarter rather than harder?
We can always be really, if we look back diligently, I thought I had the most amazing father who gave me open rein from an extremely early age to do what had to get done. And he took the view back in the 50s, early to mid 50s. I remember when he spayed every Hereford he owned in 1953. Mick Boyd spayed them, and he was so glad to be rid of them. We were going into Zebu cattle. Yep. But he took the attitude that cattle to be effective had to demonstrate it. And that made him very different. And it gave me a wonderful slant on life. And then, of course, I used to go through Mr. Beek's paddocks at Marlborough. Wag schooled a lot to go and open gates on the mail run. Because Mr. Landsberg, the mailman, he had 47 gates or something to open for the day, and he was short and round and a gate opener was good, so he didn't care how many days I took off school, and nor did my father. So I had this wonderful childhood where I always thank God for his blessings, and one of them was his father that gave me absolute open rein and gave me jobs far bigger than I could ever handle, so I'd fail early on and learn a bit of humility, hopefully. Yes. But it gave me a wonderful grounding in thinking outside the box at that point. And the other, there was lots of inspirational people, like Mr. DeLandles at Cherokee was way ahead of his time, and he was so benevolent to me when I was a kid. Yeah. I think the world of that old man. Mm-hmm. Tom Lassiter in the United States, I used to read every advertisement that he had. My father used to get American Cattleman magazines from a friend in the US, and Tom Lassiter said the same thing. Show me what you can do, cow. Don't look pretty and style yourself up. Just show me. And he demanded a calf every year from every cow he owned. Now, Mr. Lassiter or Mr. DeLandles or my father or myself would be the first to say, not every cow will do it. We just want to find the ones that can. And so that was an interesting or fascinating start in life. Unfortunately, I lost my dad when I was 22. And that really put some responsibility in the camp, and we had to really redouble our efforts, which we did. And I had a lot of younger brothers and sisters, so I set about to triple the land and the cattle numbers very quickly. That did blow up, actually. And what you said before about it, you can be the odd man out too often, and I was. And so it was easy to just, shunt me out of the picture and keep on doing business as usual, and that happened. And then I had this wonderful background in coal mining where you could talk to some of the best geologists and the best analysts in the coal game who really knew their numbers. Yeah. So all that was wonderful grounding that if you interrogate data, you will discover something. Mightn't be what you wanted to discover, but you will discover. So I've always kept data. And so,
that's in itself, in the agricultural industry, when you were talking, that happening, data was a foreign word to 95% of agriculture back then.
Probably 99%.
Yeah, and everyone just went about doing what Dad did, and kept on doing it that way. And like you said, some failed, some succeeded. You and your thirst for that data obviously was very strong, and you said you went your own way from the rest of the family. So did you make a solid decision from that day on that you were going to capture this data and make it work, because it was your number one passion? Like you said, you didn't need the prettiest cows or the best bull, you needed ones that worked for you. So where did you turn then to get that data, or did you just decide I can do this by a selection process myself?
There was a need to do it. And whereas the beef industry didn't, except for Mr. Lassiter, and Mr. DeLandles was measuring feed conversion in 1960.
Yes.
And he built 40-something stalls just to measure net feed efficiency. What a classical man. And so I always honouring my father, I suppose, and thanking God, but these wonderful people are in our way. And compounded with that, I wagged school often to go to Belmont Research Station.
Yep.
Father would take me to a cattlemen's conference with cattlemen from all over the state and indeed Australia. I met Dr. Butterfield when I was about 12 years old from the University of Sydney.
Wow.
He dissected all breeds of cattle into muscle, fat and bone and connective tissue. What a glorious soul, because he actually, I approached him and right at the end of the meeting and I said, could I have a word with you? He said, yes, don't go away, I've got to do a couple of things here and I'll come and see you. And I sat down over there on the stool and I waited. And this eminent professor sat down beside me and told me everything he knew.
Yeah.
So it was I think we're very fortunate where we land in life. And Ken Coombe, who only passed away last year.
Yeah.
Ken was our neighbour when I was probably 14 or 15, and Ken was measuring cattle when other people thought you were a lunatic. He'd sit on his veranda and encourage me to think about management and nutrition and genetics. And so he told me when he was a very old man what a great joy he got out of those conversations, because he was this kid that wanted to jump all these hurdles.
Yeah.
And bless Ken's heart,
Yeah.
he took a lot of time. Like his Sunday afternoons were the only time he was going to get with Jan and the children.
That's right.
And he had me sitting there encouraging.
So, clearly you had a fascination and a want to learn to do things differently to the way the normal person did it back then.
Sure.
We're talking probably mid-60s.
Yep.
And like you said, Ken Coombe was pretty unique back then because he captured data.
Very.
So you progressed and married and had your own family and ran a very solid family business. So capturing the data, did that become a family affair for you? And everything was a measured thing. And how did you go about measuring that? I hear your story about the professor, and he's got a lab and all of the things to go about. Was it just basic? Basic practices that you improved, that you measured. More about your animals than most people know about their animals.
I'll give you an example.
You just genuinely believe that is the best way to do business.
I believe it is the best way. It's the only way we can keep faith with our commercial cattle clients. Yep. And one of those other early grounding things was, whereas beef cattlemen generally didn't do it, and we just spoke about the handful that did, and they were inspirational, but dairy people measured everything, and so did pig people. So I used to hang out with dairy people and pig people whenever I could find them, and I'd read their bulletins. And then I was given bulletins from University of Florida, Texas A&M when I was a child.
Yep.
I had an uncle that had no sons, but he adopted me real quick. He gave me bulletins from the 30s from CSIRO's early research.
Yep.
And so I can't take credit for all this stuff. I was able to pull it together. And initially, we had to analyse what mattered to a commercial herd. And it became very apparent that it was low cost of production and high reproduction. And one of the other real heroes in there that I sat and had endless conversations, discussions, debates, was Tom Rudder in the DPI. Now, Tom Rudder, he was never in his office. He was always in someone's paddock analysing. one of the guys he worked closely with was Heck Maynard.
Yes.
You know, they would... Alan Rideout was doing... When rubber bands drove computers, Alan Rideout was doing spreadsheets on his whole cattle herd at Mount Crumbit at Bellawilla.
Yeah.
So if you hang out with those kind of people, some of it rubs off, and I was hungry for the knowledge. And there was another bloke I went looking for in England when I was 18. I left Australia when I was 18 looking for, and I had an agenda. They were measuring net feed efficiency in Scotland, and I wanted to see it. So I went there, and we couldn't afford to do what they were doing on the research station.
No.
But the most efficient dairy herd in the whole of the UK was owned by Harry Morrell. And I went to the Metropolitan Milk Board to find this out. So I hitched up the M1 up to Yorkshire and knocked on his door. Well, he treated me with open arms, treated me like his best son.
Oh, wow.
What a man.
Yeah.
He measured everything.
Yeah. So do you put a lot of your success over the years down to Brahman cattle, or do you put it down to beef cattle in general, or do you put it down to your willingness to do things probably not what is regarded as mainstream? And let's be real, you're very successful now. You've got, lots of land, and you've raised a very successful family who have all taken on some 90%. I think all have taken on some role in the rural industry at some stage. So do you sheet that back to your father spaying his Hereford cows and bringing in zebu, or do you think that your thirst for knowledge and your thirst to make things work are on a par with Brahman cattle?
I'm certain that Brahma cattle have been the common denominator in everything we've done. Now, I'm saying that from a position of strength because for 35 years I tried to develop an adapted composite. And what I've noticed is there are plenty of claims about cattle, but very few are adapted enough to handle the difficult times where we're going to strike. Like if you drive through the Marlborough district now, there's no grass to be seen.
No.
And my place is worse than that because I've got bad manners when it comes to stocking rates at times.
Yep.
But it's been a wonderful way to stress cattle without killing them and finding the ones that work. And so if you decide that reproduction, which is 70% of all the margin ever made out of cattle, and the reproduction at a specific time, if you can determine that, which Tom wrote, and all those clever people helped me, Dr. Frisch, Dr. Becker, Professor Docchio, what brilliant minds. And I was able to just hang out with those guys. And they were always introducing us new ideas and new people. But management is the overrider. I don't care what breed you may choose. In my mind, the only two breeds that have succeeded for adaptation have been Brahma cattle and the Boran cattle out of Africa, out of Kenya. And I've used both.
Yep.
I've used 4 African breeds in the search for adapted species and the search for reproduction. The other breeds weren't tough enough. They just fell out of our system. But the zebu or the zebu wine, the hump species, stayed, generally speaking. And I'd like to include, we did some head-to-head comparisons in Brazil. We were breeding between 8,000 and 12,000 calves a year in Brazil with CBV semen out of a full-blood Nelore herd. And it ended up a big herd. We built it on the basis of reproduction up to 55,000 cows, actually.
Wow.
And then the whole lot went under sugarcane in 2 years.
Oh, no. What happened to the 55,000 cows?
They just, poof, gone.
Yeah.
One bloke came and got 6,000 heifers and took them home. But the comparison with the Nelore cattle, which I admire greatly because they're highly adapted, but they're lean and they're fast, and the reproduction was suboptimal. And we changed that. And the subsequent second and third cross cattle that we were involved with were awesome. And I pay a lot of respect to the adapted capacity of the bush Nelore, not the show Nelore. And when I'm speaking Brahma cattle, I'm not talking show cattle.
No.
There's show cattle and there's Brahma bush cattle.
Yep.
We relate to the Brahma bush cattle, which is northern Australia and central. There have been people come and go out of zebu cattle, but every time you have a serious conversation with cattlemen, they'll say we need to get our zebu or our Brahma advantage back.
Yes.
We went into a flatter back, or we went into a hairier thing, or a whiter thing, or a blacker thing, or a redder thing, and it failed because our cost of production just shot through the roof. So Brahma cattle, to me, the pointy end of them have been awesome. And one, it's because of their ability to be adapted. But the other thing is that without management, and I just mentioned that before, management is first. So you've got to be really bloody minded about management intensity. In our case, we mate October 1st every year. Doesn't matter whether, like, we're going to be mating in, 2 weeks' time?
Yes.
No grass.
No.
Nothing on the horizon, but we're going to mate because there'll be a percentage of those cattle will conceive and maintain the pregnancy regardless of what's happening, and we have hunted for them. And now we're in our 5th decade of hunting for them.
So walk us through that procedure. You know, lots of people cull, you know, after first, you know, lots of people, don't join first year heifers, and then, you know, in their second year they get one go, and if they don't produce a calf, they're culled and off they go. I'm guessing your aim is that you don't have to have any culled heifers, that they're all going to produce a calf either at their first or second year joining, depending on what your management strategies are.
We'll invite them to have a go.
Yes, yep.
And we've had some abysmally low rates. Like I trucked cattle all the way to McKinley out towards Cloncurry for 2 years, and I got a 30-odd% pregnant heifers and a 46%.
Yeah.
And they were licking up Gidgee Burr and turning over rocks. But at least we had somewhere to park them.
Yes.
And thanks to Sid Batt and his wife Leonie, they were so kind to us.
Yeah.
And Jimmy Brodie next door, they were wonderful people to be around. But out of that 30-odd% and the 46%, they were stars. They were truly... And you asked what we measure. Well, leading up to those matings, both years, I palpated their ovaries for development. I scored their uterus for development and size. I gave them a condition score and a kilogram score, trying to see what made a difference. After all of that, the pregnancies were independent of weight and age, but they were very specific to sires. There were 2 bulls that stood out that were double the average that year in their daughters' pregnancies. So you asked what we measured. I ripped straight home and I kept 12 sons of both those bulls out of cows that had 8 or 10 calves perfect interval. And that was a successful operation. We did lots, during that period we were measuring testicle diameters too.
Yep.
But not to see how big they got, but how early they went from soprano to baritone. And that's very definable.
Yep.
And so we tore into that. Crikey, we've been well over 30 years doing that.
Yep.
I've got to mention a fella come from Missouri, a fella called Professor Jim Kinder,
Yes.
who I met in 1990 with Dr. Docchio, a reproduction physiologist, both of them. And Kinder, the what do you call it? The symbol for the state of Missouri is a mule, stubborn as a damn mule. That's the first thing, and he can be. And the other statement is, show me.
Yes.
And I adopted that over many years, and I'm proud to say, and I was telling Jim Kinder the other day, because I talk to him often,
Yes.
and he's an inspirational man. And I said, Jim, I've had to adopt the Missouri stance, this show me business. I can't think of any other way to describe what cattle have got to do. Just show me what you can do.
Yes.
Don't roll your eye, don't have floody eyelashes or step around pretty. Show me what you can do. And the remarkable thing is that the cattle still end up looking just like cattle.
That's it. That's right. Not a lot of difference really, is there?
That is not.
So, we'll wind the clock back to the 30 years with the, your nucleus herd of, a 30% calving and a 46% calving 2 years. That 30% and 46%, those cows came home and were obviously the start of that process forward. Did it continue? Was that a genetic trait that those cows then continued to throw into their, those that had heifers, calves? Did that process continue?
Isn't it funny, you know, we're looking at, with the benefit of 30 years hindsight now, we had done the same pressure matings on heifers every single year at the same time, but that year there was just simply no grass. Well, there were little bits of grass,
Yeah.
and we just threw gates open all over Karura, out at McKinley.
Yeah.
But when you looked at the scenery, it was red dirt and gidgee rocks, but they were looking up gidgee burr, and so they survived. But now it appears that uterine survival is driven by some fascinating biological Velcro, to put it in our terms.
Yep.
Spermatology has been done to death for 80 years, and very little's changed. Extremely small changes in reproduction in raw terms.
Yep.
But if you look at a chart on uterine survival, virtually all joinings result in a conception. Well over 95%, 95 to 98% of all joinings of roughly healthy cows and roughly healthy bulls. That's not a problem. It could be if you were neglectful of a few other factors, but it's not a problem. But uterine survival between day 7 and day 21, you'll lose 45 to 65% of those conceptors. That's a huge number.
I was going to say that's a big loss.
And I think that we had no idea what was driving the higher reproduction as it become, because you asked me, did the heifers that came through, really jumped through the hoops, did they have successful progeny and sons and daughters? The answer was yes to that. That was a bell ringer. It made us even more hungry for more knowledge and more data. What can we collect and analyse that might help us get there? So we put the herd into speed bands, which meant that if you carved off the first 3-week mating and you were tagged on August 14,
Yes.
you were a golden girl, and you went straight to C1 or the alpha group.
Yep.
And become a mating group. And we mated bulls in there that had a similar record of their daughters and their mothers. So we were sort of stacking the deck there pretty heavily. And if you didn't get pregnant in the first sight of a bull, but the second 3-week mating, and we had all these sire groups mated in controls, then you got into the Bravo group, and you also got access to some pretty wonderful bulls for the track record. I guess I keep coming back to track record or this show me stuff.
Yep.
Got to show me. And if you show me that you're competent, I'll put you in my best cows. And there was a really funny thing happened on the way through that, I suppose. We imported 24 bulls out of North America, all glorious looking things from fantastic people. But they almost all failed at our cost of production. And I suppose that reinforces what I was saying before. If you manage tightly with a low cost of production, you're going to discover some amazing genes. And you're also going to cut the throat of a lot of cattle that you thought were going to be good.
Yes.
And may have cost you a lot of money. In that case, it cost me dearly because I borrowed every damn cent to get them here. and my wife said to me at the time, "Do you need to buy this many?" I said, "Well, how else will you find out in a hurry?"
Yeah.
You've got to have a broad range of bulls. No good getting one bull and saying, "Isn't he glorious?" and promote him to hell and say, "This is the best bull in the world," because he's not. No. He's a bull. And so we always took that view. So over the 24 bulls, 2.5 of them delivered something useful, and they did. And it was interesting that when you delved in behind them, they had management. Management comes up every time. It trumps genetics every time. But management and genetics is an unbeatable combination, in my terms.
Yep.
And don't blink, I guess.
Yeah.
Because, we were talking before, we're very open about our failures. It's the only way we can get a stepping stone to get to the next point.
That's right. That's right.
And those 30% and 40% and 50% pregnancies that we've had, it's not just once. We have had them on different occasions. And we never blame the weather, we never blame ourselves, or I can kick me backside for being a stupid overstocker at times.
Yep.
But I always pay it back to the environment later. I always develop the country again. But there's always some animals that want to say, yes, we will do the job. And I can give an example of that. About 2 years ago, we were having a little bull sale on the property, and the night before, Rick Whittle, who puts all our data in, and he's a retired veterinarian, I said to him, Rick, we got a fair few bulls by 84, 87. That's the white Poley bull. There's a lot of bulls in this catalogue. He said, oh, yeah, you got over 100 calves by that bull. I said, no, we've never got 100 calves by any bull. And he was only made it for 9 weeks.
Yes.
So Rick, being Rick, went straight to the computer, went clackety-clack, and came up with, and he doesn't make a lot of jokes, Rick. He just looked at me and said, try 171 calves weaned. Then figure out how many were actually conceived.
Yes.
And you rarely saw that bull work.
Mm.
I loaned him to a friend of mine later who said he never saw him work.
Yes.
Alongside another bull that he saw working all the time. They got equal calves.
Yeah.
So there's something in, I think, the biological velcros, uterine survival, uterine attachment, and if we can do all that at low cost of production, then these kind of zebu cattle, or Brahman cattle as we know them, are our kind of cattle.
Yeah.
And they are evolving. There's constant evolution. Like day after tomorrow, we'll go through probably 220 bulls to pick 120 to mate in various herds.
Mm-hmm.
Collaborator herds, daughter herds, my own herds.
Yep.
And we'll be trying to get our mind around all those little bits of data.
And so do you, along with the family, did you develop a like a program that you now feed all that data into, and then, you know, tonight, tomorrow, before you go through those, when you go to those bulls, do you, you know, have a program that spits you out a bit of paper that goes, okay, Alf, this is bull A, and this is what we know about him. Is that what you make your decision on, that he gets to go to the
Yes.
to fun, or he goes and has his head cut off tomorrow?
Yeah, well, I'm never so hasty to cut the heads off anymore because I made some monumental mistakes at times. I thought he was useless and turned out his daughters are bulletproof.
Yeah. Yep.
You'll do that sometimes if you've got a bad-tempered bull.
Mm-hmm.
And we get odd ones.
Yep.
The parents are gentle, but the bull's not sociable.
Yep.
And you think, oh, bugger, I'm not going to continue to use that bull.
No.
But you find his daughters are awesome for reproduction.
Yeah.
And I try not to be snappy about my decisions now. He can sit in a paddock, cost me $100 a year to keep him there.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that helped us a lot, I better answer your question first. We will have printouts on all 220 bulls for days to calving, puberty threshold, LiveX dollar index, JAP dollar index. They're the things that matter. Also, the calving interval for 4 generations of their mothers, grandmothers, great-grandmothers, etc. We'll have that data with us right there.
Yep.
In separate folders, and we'll look at it because we can't remember all the stuff we need to.
Oh gosh, no.
And all bulls are leather-bound books.
Yes.
You can't see right in them.
No.
But the things that drive them, the data helps us find it.
Mm.
That's the exciting bit.
Yep. So, you know, it's for a man who'd grown up, you know, well, didn't spend a lot of time, I guess, but you know, right up until your dad died, and then when you took over, that part of you was very much, you know, an appeal thing. So now when Alf Collins goes through his 220 bulls, if it's got the best figures, you know, if it's the best of everything that's on that piece of paper, but is an atrocious looking animal, do you go, once I cut the skin off that, if that bull goes ahead and breeds some bullocks for me, and when I send them to Meatworks and they cut the skin off it, we're not going to know that it had a crooked nose, or it, you know, had a bit of a sway back, or it had a straight leg, or all the things that lots of other people cull their bulls for. Do you take any of that into consideration, or do you go, I'm working this beast on, I'm selecting and keeping this bull because of this information that I've got?
Kay, I love quiet cattle. That's the first thing. I've had some that weren't. Mm-hmm. I've bought some that weren't.
We've all had that.
Yep. I've bought some that turned out evil. They weren't evil when I bought them. This is a long time back. I'm talking 40 years ago now. I don't want to go there again.
No.
But the remarkable thing is, if you select for function, the cattle turn out pretty much like cattle.
Mm.
We like them to be fleshy.
Yep.
We like them to be very athletic. At the end of every bull sale now, our little annual bull sale, we'll let out 80 bulls out of the first wire cooler, and they run back through the stockyard and out, and people can't wait to wrap the sail up so they can come and watch the bulls run through.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting, and they tear through there because they don't want to get belted by the bloke behind them.
Yeah, yeah.
And then they pull out there and play and mess about, and then we'll let another 100 through out of the next wire yard of 4 and 5-year-old fellas.
Yep.
And they just look, I don't know, I try not to differentiate, I suppose. If they're a little bit different and I don't know, real wacko, I think the cattle turn out pretty much like cattle.
Yeah, yeah. They've got all the traits that people who choose don't choose on genetics, they choose on conformation, I guess. The confirmation's there if the genetics are there is I guess the point of the exercise.
I did have a couple of new clients come to our field day and stayed for the sale. One bought some cattle, the other didn't, but he probably will. And he said, I can't believe that you don't feed these cattle something to make them look this good.
Yeah.
Because they're muscly. But you've bred a lot of cattle. It's not hard to breed muscly cattle. If you want muscly cattle, you'll breed them.
That's
you
right.
own your own management. And you'll also, if you demand they have a baby every year from the cows you retain, those things will perpetuate. And putting the herd in speed bands back 25, 26 years ago, one of my daughters just told me she was leaving school when she was about 15 and looked me in the eye and said, I'm going to do this. And we've all been there. We're going to be rebels. I remember your youth and a few others of my good friends. And long live the rebels. And I said, you reckon we could get this herd into speed bands this year, first year? You know, you've got responsibilities now. He said, yep, no worries. And that was the start of putting them in speed bands. Now, there was no way to analyse reproduction speed at that time other than our own management groups. So we devised an Excel spreadsheet that gave us a starting point of C1 and a finishing point of C5, and it didn't matter where they landed, we didn't care.
No.
We just analysed the ones that started in C1 and stayed there, and they were very rare. We analysed the ones that started in C5 and come back to C1. But over a 10-year period, we had an average C value. We also had a number of where they varied from where they started, plus or minus.
Yep.
That was powerful because there was no genetic analysis for this trait. And I used to talk to the people at Agbu endlessly, wanting this stuff, and they said, so do we. So I gave them all my data. They developed days to calving, not just off mine. It'd be foolish for me to say so, but that was their benchmark.
Yep.
And that was the start of the very, very special data we have today of days to calving, dollar indexes for JAPOX and dollar indexes for reproduction, for JAP, start again. Reproduction, which is days to calving, then you've got JAPOX dollar index and LiveX dollar index. Now, reproduction is better represented in the LiveX ones because that's a faster turnover of cattle at 420 kilos with 300 to 400 kilos. Whereas the JAPOX one will show some benefit of some larger, lazier cattle, but because reproduction drives the data, drives the profit, it is the majority of the figure in the equation. And I think it's got real legs.
So, you know, you're always been ahead of your time. What do you think is the next, where do you think the next bit of information, what do you think is the next bit of information, I guess, that the beef industry in particular needs to improve, to go ahead, you know, to keep pace with the world, I guess, and the changing way that people have to do business, the changing ways that people like to live, the changing socioeconomic areas that we live in. You know, if you kept doing what you were doing 40 years ago, you wouldn't know what you know now. What do you think is the next hurdle that we're going to need to jump, I guess, to be able to maintain the pace that continues to drive our industry as a business rather than just something we like to do?
Yes, it must be a business, that's for sure. The more we discover we don't know.
That's right.
So if we thought we knew one or two things, I can safely say now that there's a million things I don't know anything about, but I'm anxious to find out some of them.
Yep.
I'm never sure about it when people say you're ahead of your time, because that means you can die ahead of your time too, you know. And
I don't think that'll happen to you, Alf.
I had a wonderful old friend in New South Wales, and that's what his wife said to him when he was gone at 67. And she said David was always ahead of his time. I wish he didn't do this one.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
That's the one you'd like to fail.
But hell, he kicked a lot of goals, that fella, in his short life too.
Yeah.
You know. On a serious note, well, that was serious. We didn't want to lose him. But I suppose cattle that can reproduce at a low cost of production will preserve what you spoke about, our terms of trade, the lifestyle that we would like to lead with a margin in it that we're not anxious. And I guess I've tried, I work hard to take the anxiety out of cattle. I like to laugh at my life, and I like to smile at my cattle, and I like to be able to smile and thank God for his goodness that allows us to go and do it.
Yes.
But the terms of trade must be preserved. Costs are escalating all the time. We've constantly got to produce, in my time, this is easy, if we focus on low cost of production, high reproduction, and rapid acceleration of growth, which is very different from selecting great big chunkers of things that you cannot keep the groceries up to.
That's right.
But there are ways of measuring production per hectare per 100 mils of rain that are very effective. And if we focus on that, see, we haven't even unravelled the biome of the gut, which is double the biome of you and me or the trees or the grass. And no one's bothered to look in it. Very few people have, I won't say no one has, because obviously people do, but they're not fashionable research, so they're shelved or they can't get funding. The function of the liver has enormous repercussions through the entire endocrine system. The function of the whole myriad of lipids or fats, because you must have lipids to transport hormones to and from the pituitary and then endocrine system to the ovaries and the testes and all the production systems. They're subjects that aren't flavour of the month. They don't get much recognition, but you asked me a good question there, and it's worthy of a good answer, because that's the meaning of success in my terms in the next little while. Let's unravel the things that matter, not reinvent the wheel with just a different hubcap. And I just get so tired of that kind of research. I've viewed it as a bit of humour, I suppose, and that's why we just go and do our own stuff.
Yep.
Because you're waiting for the conventional people who control research funds, like the MLA. I used to talk to them till I was blue in the face, and it was like talking to a tree. And one time, one of their CEOs, he said to me, you'll have to talk to Dr. So-and-so about this. He was waiting to get out of Dodge. He didn't want to be talking to me. And I said, it's like talking to a bloody tree. I've already spoken to him. Yes. That's why I'm talking to you. Yeah. And you don't want to talk to me about it, and you go to hell. You have no importance to the cattle industry whatsoever. I'll go find someone that does want to hunt these facts down. And that is when we engaged Professor Hayes, Professor Docchio, and Professor Goddard into a team to do private research.
Yep.
And they were so willing and so generous with their time and their minds, because each of those fellows are just world authorities. And I spoke of Prof. Kinder in the US from Missouri. Another guy in Brazil, Pietro Barrucelli, is an awesome researcher, and he's given us a lot of wind in our sails by encouragement and supposition. And let's look at this too, my friends.
Yes.
In fact, when we finish this interview, I'll show you some diagrams that he helped put together. Fascinating stuff. I carry them around in my pocket all the time.
For a bit of light reading. So, I guess, it is sometimes, frustrating that, like you say, all the information you get is just, and that's a good analogy, a new hubcap put on it. But do you think if we can harness some of that knowledge that is going to keep us at the forefront, I guess, of what it's going to take for us to be able to stay in business as cattlemen?
It is going to take that. It is going to take that intensity of thought, which means, and that puts the good end of Brahman cattle in an extraordinary position, because my limited experience breeding cattle is that nothing has ever matched the tenacity of a good Brahma, with the exception of the very best of the brand. Not the brand breed. They were an absolute bell curve. I ran a herd of brand as a zoo for 10 years. And I kept all the failures and the winners, and to establish a bell curve on them, because I live on bell curves. And the best end of those were quite extraordinary. You know, one of those original brand bulls had identical carcass traits to the Angus controls at Clay Centre in the United States. No one talks about it. But he had identical carcass traits, a bull called B22. I bought him out of the consortium because he was quiet and he was functional, and I knew he had some good data. I didn't care about the carcass stuff because you don't get paid for it.
No.
But you do get paid for kilograms per hectare per 100 mils.
Yes.
So what must we do? Find the cattle we can do that at a low cost. And that's where this high level of adaptation is a must-have in my terms.
Yep.
Because I did mention I'd mated 13 different breeds that all claimed they were good. And incidentally, of those whole plethora of Bos Taurus cattle, they were Bos Taurus mostly, some Sangas, some African Sangas, 3 different strains of those. The Galloway, that was reared on rocks and bracken fern at the top of the Snowy River, was the most successful of all the Tauruses. For the common reason we were just discussing, they are adapted beyond all else in that environment.
To harsh conditions.
And the man that bred them put a lifetime into selecting cattle that would do that. He was an inspiration to me, a man called Hainsworth T. Cock. He was involved in alternate health, and he was a leader in his field. He's formed the Orthomolecular Society. But Hainsworth and I were friends since I was 18.
Yes.
How fortunate are we to meet these wonderful people early in our lives?
Gosh, Alf, you certainly have met your fair share of pretty dynamic people in your life, and I guess your thirst for knowledge is probably what makes you go and seek those people out, and it's certainly something that you are to be congratulated on, because you don't just take what you're told lying down. You need to be able to have that backed up with some proper data that's going to actually be to be able to be tested, and you're happy to do the testing yourself. You don't necessarily think that is someone else's job. And so, I know that you could sit here and talk about this for hours, and we'll probably get you back to have a second go around of a chat, because there is so much to the way you do things. But we'd just like to thank you for coming in, and I guess there's plenty of cattle producers out there who owe you a big debt for their successes. So we're very honoured to have people like you in the industry. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for making it happen, Kay.
No problem.
Pleasure, Kay.
No problem.
Pleasure, Kay.